What is the World Economic Forum? If you're like me, you may have never heard of it. I was unaware of its presence until I started hearing political commentary about it the past couple years, often casting it in a negative light. I was curious why this organization was receiving so much backlash and wanted to understand the perspectives of the organization itself and its opponents. In this video, I'll attempt to provide you all with an overview of the World Economic Forum, its stated goals, who it's made of, and try to uncover exactly why some accuse it of being more nefarious than they would let on. This is not to say that I personally believe it to be some shady organization, but simply to make you all aware of the institution so that you can do your own research and decide what you think for yourself. There is far more information on this topic than I'm going to present in this video, so I would encourage you all to do your own digging. I'm simply trying to illuminate the thought processes and reasons why some may find this non-governmental organization to be suspect. In an attempt to be as charitable as possible, the majority of information I present here will be taken directly from the WEF website, often in their own words. Founded by German economist Klaus Schwab in 1971, the World Economic Forum, or WEF, was created as an independent nonprofit. The World Economic Forum describes itself as, quote, the international organization for public-private cooperation. It provides a global, impartial, and not-for-profit platform for meaningful connection between stakeholders to establish trust and build initiatives for cooperation and progress. In essence, the World Economic Forum is a think tank of business leaders and governmental leaders working in cooperation to examine the future of global economics and develop a better world where, quote, cooperation and trust lead to lasting progress. From what I've gathered, the main focuses of the World Economic Forum are creating a more participatory global economy and increasing sustainable practices to ensure that we take care of the planet that takes care of us. The WEF hosts an annual meeting in which prominent business people, government leaders, and experts discuss the current global economic state, room for improvements, and possible plans to create a more equitable, sustainable future. In their own words, the forum acts in the spirit of entrepreneurship and in the global public interest to further economic growth and social progress. The forum serves its members and society by creating partnerships between businesses, political, intellectual, and other leaders to define, discuss, and advance key issues on the global agenda. The WEF has significantly grown since its inception, and as a result it has become somewhat specialized. It's divided into these 10 centers, each focused on progress in a specific economic niche. The 10 centers are as follows: advanced manufacturing and supply chains, cybersecurity, energy and materials, financial and monetary systems, health and healthcare, nature and climate, trade and geopolitics, fourth industrial revolution, new economy and society, and urban transformation. The executive chairman of the WEF is the founder, Klaus Schwab. The forum itself is guided by a board of trustees that they claim is divided equally between representatives of the business community, leaders of international organizations, and civil society. As an executive body, they have a managing board that ensures activities fit the mission of the forum and reports to the board of trustees. According to the WEF, the forum is funded by the, quote, contributions of 1,000 of the world's foremost corporations, end quote. In other words, the world's richest corporations fund the institution. And I'm not trying to exaggerate when I say that. I mean it when I say nearly every major corporation you can think of is a partner of the World Economic Forum. Apple, Google, Amazon, Microsoft, BP, Chevron, Bank of America, JP Morgan, BlackRock, Pfizer, Lockheed Martin, Walmart, Coca-Cola, Pepsi, the list goes on and on. Some prominent speakers and guests of the forum have been John Kerry, Donald Trump, Al Gore, who's on the board of trustees, Kristalina Georgieva, she's the managing director of the IMF, and she's also on the board of trustees, as well as Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen and several state governors and representatives. Now that you've listened to me ramble through the kind of boring parts of talking about this organization, you may be asking, Okay, so what's the point? And that's a valid question. Provided their framework, their mission, and some of their goals, it seems as though the WEF genuinely wants to make the world a better place. But there are certain things that some people find a bit unsettling about the World Economic Forum, which have led some to call into question what their agenda is. Negative attitudes range from a general distrust to what others may consider beliefs in a global conspiracy. Let's examine why these attitudes have arisen. As mentioned before, the WEF's self-described mission is to create public-private partnerships. This is one of the elements that sets off alarm bells for some people. The World Economic Forum explicitly states that it works alongside governments. So imagine this. 1,000 of the world's richest people get together at a conference alongside your elected officials and representatives with the aim of planning for the future. Some would argue that there is no way that these massive corporations would not be exchanging influence with governmental leaders, and that unelected rich people will direct the course of governmental policy. But others could argue that this is simply the nature of the global economy, and that it's necessary for leaders of industries to cooperate alongside governments in order to achieve certain goals for the common good, like mitigating climate change. Nonetheless, the nature of public-private partnerships puts some people on edge, and it doesn't help when Klaus Schwab says things like what he says in this clip.
Second way of contributing to make this a better world is to look at all those issues in a holistic way. Political, economic, social, and ecological dimensions of every issue today are intertwined. So here we are, and you may ask, why do we have 400 sessions? It is to deal with all the aspects of our global system. Let's also be clear. The future is not just happening. The future is built by us, by a powerful community as you here in this room. We have the means to improve the states of the world. But two conditions are necessary. The first one is that we act all as stakeholders of larger communities, that we serve not our only self-interests, but we serve the community. That's what we call stakeholder responsibility. And second, that we collaborate. This is the reason why you find many opportunities here during the meeting to engage into very action and impact-oriented initiatives to make progress related to specific issues on the global agenda.
Or like what he says in this clip regarding elections in the future.
The technology now is, and digital technologies mainly have an analytical power. Now we go into a predictive power, and we have seen the first examples, and your company very much involved into it. But then the next step could be to go into a prescriptive mode, which means you do not even have to have elections anymore, because you can already predict, and afterwards you can say, why do we need elections? Because we know what the result will be.
Something about the richest people in the world declaring that the future is built by them leads some people to believe that the WEF is an elitist group attempting to control the state of political, governmental, and economic affairs. Another contentious matter was the theme of the 2021 annual summit in Davos, titled The Great Reset. Following the coronavirus pandemic, the World Economic Forum argued for a restructuring of our global economic system, and often refers to creating a new world. In addition to this, Klaus Schwab has repeatedly advocated for a stakeholder economy, or a system in which businesses and corporations make decisions to better the collective of everyone and the environment rather than making profits as their first motive. In other words, everyone and Earth itself is a stakeholder, and companies should strive to serve all of these stakeholders rather than the company's shareholders. This is reinforced by the World Economic Forum pushing for ESG scores, or environmental, social, and governance scores. ESG would evaluate a company's commitment to social justice, DEI, environmental stability, and governance practices, and assign them a score. If a company has a low ESG score, investment in that company would be discouraged, while companies with high ESG scores are encouraged investments. What's the problem with that? Some argue that implementing ESG scores would be to effectively punish opposition to certain political agendas by attributing low scores to those who do not fall in line with the common social justice causes. Reasons one may oppose these ESG causes devoted to inclusion and sustainability include beliefs that businesses should be making a profit, that should be their goal, rather than some larger social agenda, as well as increased business expenses and claims that DEI policies undermine meritocracy and focus on identity unnecessarily. At this point, you can probably guess that most of the pushback comes from those who are right-leaning on the political spectrum. In a nutshell, some people believe that ESG scores are a means of controlling corporate interests. On the other hand, several large corporations such as Unilever have discussed how shifting their business model to one more focused on ESG has actually made them more profitable. I think the biggest problem with the whole Great Reset narrative is that it sounds very utopian, or dystopian depending on who you ask. Like, the WEF is really capable of creating a perfect world if the world would just listen. And some of the language used by Klaus Schwab often paints the current state of the world as being in an existential crisis, kind of like he does in this clip.
There are some people who claim we are now in a deglobalizing world. But actually, I would say we have to re-globalize this world. We have to make sure that we strengthen cooperation because, as it was mentioned, we are faced with issues which are of existential importance for humankind. History is truly at a turning point. We do not yet know the full extent and the systemic and structural changes which will happen. Of course, we look at all the challenges. We can speak about the multi-crisis: economic, political, social, and ecological, and institutional crisis. But actually, what we have to confront, the deep, systemic, and structural restructuring of our world. And this will take some time. And the world will look differently after we have gone through this transition process.
The world is at a tipping point, so the global economic structure must be reset now. The WEF also often discusses communal ownership and puts out videos like this one. And here's yet another example. Coupling the statements about the world being at a tipping point with the videos that I just showed, some people just get an eerie feeling about it all. Here's one commentator giving thoughts on the subject of communal ownership.
We are so keen on talking about business and government collaborating. And doesn't that just sound like such a good thing? Business and government collaborating. What happens there is you have the people who own the rules, enforce right and wrong, and have a financial incentive to be corrupt, working with the people who have the money and have an incentive to corrupt them. It's a dreadful formula just to begin with. However, what concerns me is perhaps on a bigger scale than that. When we talk about collective ownership, we are often told that the great thing about it is that everybody will own. The reality of the thing is that nobody but those in power own. And that impulse to take away private property ownership and to concentrate it into the hands of a representative government is purely Marxist. I mean, it is the heart and soul of the Marxist idea, which stripped down to its basics is nobody owns property, it is collectively owned. And as I say, of course, the fallacy there is that it is not actually collectively owned, it is owned by those in power.
Douglas, what about the threats to the property that we already own? Is there a risk there that we might lose our ownership over our existing property?
David, that's an excellent question, and it's one that I think people are not considering. Now, think again of those words. You will own nothing, and you will be happy. It doesn't allow for you will continue to own what your family has bequeathed down the generations. The simple statement, if we are to take them at their word, is you will own nothing, and you will be happy. Now, that poses some fascinating problems in terms of what communities already own. We, largely around the world, we own our homes. We bequeath heirlooms, family heirlooms to the next generation. You might own a wedding ring. You might own things that you want to give on to your children. And I would argue that that is one of the very best things that we do. Each generation tries to uplift the next generation. This philosophy seems to be saying, instead of doing that, we reset each generation at zero and leave you dependent on a government welfare system.
Okay, so the main point I'm trying to make here is that some people see the WEF as vying for power in both public and private life, which is why I think this next video went viral as well.
I have a question about patient engagement, and you had touched on this before. All of these advances are amazing, but even if you make the greatest drug or the greatest wearable, there's no guarantee that the patient is going to take the drug, wear the device. So how are you thinking about technology to engage the patient?
Yeah. Again, maybe I will use an example. I think it's fascinating what's happening in this field right now. I mean, FDA approved the first electronic pill, if I can call it like that. So it is basically a biological chip that it is in the tablet. And once you take the tablet and dissolves into your stomach, sends a signal that you took the tablet. So imagine the applications of that, compliance. The insurance companies to know that the medicines that patients should take, they do take them. It is fascinating what happens in this field.
Okay, so at this point you've seen the videos of the future is built by us and predictions for 2030 and some of the other clips. And the serious question that those staunchly opposed to the WEF would raise is, if these are your predictions for the future, and the future is built by you, does this not mean that this is what you aim for the world to become? Maybe you're someone who thinks the WEF is a cabal of globalist elites trying to take away property rights and rule the world. Maybe you're someone that thinks they're a favorable institution simply trying to better the human experience. Or maybe you're somewhere in between. Regardless, my hope is that now everyone understands why the WEF experiences pushback. I think the main problem with the WEF, whether they are a nefarious organization or not, is that they're just insufferable at the whole optics thing. And that could be why they're not well received across the board. But they're trying their best. In an attempt to quell outrage about the Great Reset, the WEF released this video clarifying its aims.
You don't want to go back to the status quo that you had before simply because it was the status quo that got us here.
With everything falling apart, we can reshape the world in ways we couldn't before. Ways that better address so many of the challenges we face. And that's why so many are calling for a great reset. A great reset? That sounds more like buzzword bingo masking some nefarious plan for world domination. Hands up, This kind of slogan hasn't gone down well. But all we really want to say is that we all have an opportunity to build a better world. And it's not surprising that people who've been disenfranchised by a broken system and pushed even further by the pandemic will suspect global leaders of conspiracy. But the world's not that simple.
Perhaps they really just needed to clarify their aims, or perhaps they're saying one thing and intending to do something different. If you base it off of the stated objectives on their website, the WEF really seems to be well-intentioned and wishing to improve the lives of everyone on the planet by bringing together the leaders of economics and industry. On the other hand, some make the case that when you take the totality of their statements and goals, the underlying theme is really restructuring the world and life as we know it. Okay, that's about all I've got for this presentation. Thank you for sitting through it, and I am going to throw up some discussion questions so I can hear what you all think about this.